Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at something a little different, a little unexpected, maybe.
Yeah, silence.
Silence.
Yeah.
You know, you might be thinking, okay, what's so special about silence?
Right.
I'm here to find some peace. I want to make some better decisions in my life.
Maybe boost your creativity a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows?
And we've actually got some really fascinating sources to dig into today.
We do.
We've got some ancient Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah, some good old wisdom traditions there.
And we've got modern scientific findings, which is really exciting.
Yeah, so we're kind of bridging that gap, seeing where they overlap, what they tell us about silence, and how it can be used for good in your life.
Exactly. And all this is kind of pointing to the idea that silence can really help us achieve all those things, the peace, the good decisions, the creativity.
Absolutely.
It's almost like, have you ever felt like your mind is just like a crowded room?
Oh, all the time.
Full of thoughts and worries and to-dos?
Yeah, it's exhausting, right?
And what we're going to discover today is that silence can be the key to unlock some of those hidden treasures. Unlocking some of that space.
Yeah, it's almost like that silence is the key.
Yeah.
To a better, more fulfilling life in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
That's what we're seeing in all this research.
So, I mean, one of the things that kind of jumped out at me when we were looking at all of this was just how much noise we're surrounded by all the time.
Oh my gosh. It's a deluge.
It's overwhelming.
It really is, isn't it? I mean, just think about your average day, your notifications going off constantly.
Social media.
Social media, the news cycle, which is 24/7 now.
It's nonstop.
And then you've got just like the chatter, like you go outside and there's traffic, there's construction.
Oh yeah, just people talking all the time.
Yeah, it never really stops. And I think that's what the sources are really trying to point to, is that this noise isn't just annoying, it actually has a real impact.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I think sometimes it's easy to just kind of brush it off like, oh, whatever, it's just noise. Yeah.
You tune it out.
But you were saying there's an actual impact.
There is. I mean, one of the articles that we read cites a study where people were exposed to these constant digital notifications.
Okay.
And it showed that their cognitive function decreased by 10%. Just from that.
Wow.
10%?
10%?
Yeah.
That's wild.
So it's like part of your brain is literally offline.
Wow.
Because it's dealing with all of this input.
So it's not just me feeling frazzled by the end of the day.
No, not at all.
There's actual science behind that.
Absolutely.
That's pretty wild. So then where does silence fit into all of this?
Well, that's where I think the Buddhist perspective is so interesting, because they're not just talking about the absence of sound when they talk about silence.
Right.
One of the texts that we were looking at described it as fullness.
Okay.
Almost like silence itself is a source of energy, not a void.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the classic image that we all kind of have in our mind of the Buddha achieving enlightenment, sitting under the Bodhi tree, that happened in deep silence.
That's right.
Surrounded by nature.
So there's something there.
Yeah.
But is that just a story? I mean, it's a very powerful image, but is that something that we can actually relate to today?
That's the thing. That's what's really cool, is that modern science is finding all these parallels.
Wow.
So there's tons of research now showing that spending time in silence can actually reduce your stress hormones, it can improve your focus,
Okay.
and it can even promote the growth of new brain cells, which is amazing.
So silence literally, it's not just like a mystical idea. It literally changes our brains for the better.
Yeah, it seems like it.
That's wild. And this kind of makes me think about how a lot of the sources were talking about silence as a path to self-discovery.
Yeah, like a journey inward.
Yeah.
Right.
Almost like creating the space to hear your own thoughts.
Yeah, because it's so easy to get caught up in the noise and to just be constantly reacting to things. But when you have that silence, it's like you can finally hear your own voice again.
Yeah, and it's not always pretty.
No. Sometimes it can be a little scary.
Yeah, a little confronting.
One of the articles we read used this great analogy of silence being like a mirror.
Oh.
So it's reflecting your true self back to you.
Yeah.
All the good parts.
And the bad parts.
And the parts that maybe you'd rather not look at, the stuff that you try to avoid.
That's so true. It's like when things are quiet, you can't distract yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
For those bigger questions.
Yeah, the big stuff. Who am I? What am I doing here? What do I really want?
It can get real.
Yeah. And that can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's also where the real growth happens, right? It's like when you face those things, that's when you can start to make changes.
So silence kind of forces us to face ourselves.
In a way.
And that's where the self-discovery comes in.
And that's what the source material is saying, that when your brain isn't busy dealing with all the external noise,
Yeah.
it can actually shift gears and engage in a much deeper internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And that's where you start to uncover things, your core values, your fears, maybe those dreams that you had that you totally forgot about.
Yeah, that you kind of buried,
Yeah.
pushed aside.
And silence can bring those back up to the surface.
It's like excavating those parts of ourselves.
Exactly.
Wow. So we're really getting into it here. This is fascinating stuff.
It is.
It's
It's powerful.
Powerful.
I think we need to take a little break, though, and come back to this because there's so much more to unpack here.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We'll be right back. Okay, so we're back and we're diving deeper into this idea of silence.
Yeah, and how it can lead to, like we were saying before the break, that inner wealth.
Right, that inner wealth. And it's not about money or possessions, right?
No, not at all.
It's about something deeper.
Much deeper. It's about that self-knowledge that we were talking about.
Right, so you can make choices that are really aligned with who you are.
Exactly. Like you're not just reacting to the world anymore.
You're living intentionally.
You're living from a place of knowing yourself.
I love that.
Yeah.
But how do we actually find that silence?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Because life is so busy.
It is.
It's like go, go, go all the time.
Yeah, and our attention is pulled in so many different directions.
So it feels almost impossible to escape the noise.
It can feel that way, but the good news is you don't have to go live in a cave to experience the benefits of silence.
Okay, that's a relief.
Right. You don't
Right.
have to completely isolate yourself.
Yeah.
The sources that we're looking at, they actually suggest that even small intentional moments of silence can have a huge impact.
Okay, so we're talking like little pockets of silence.
Exactly, like weaving it into your
Right.
day. It doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming thing.
Okay, that feels a lot more doable.
Yeah.
What are some examples of those little pockets of silence?
Well, one that I thought was really interesting was the idea of intentional solitude.
Intentional solitude.
So it's not just being alone, it's choosing to be alone.
Okay, so it's like making that conscious decision.
Exactly. Even if it's just for like 10 minutes a day, put your phone away, turn off the TV, and just be with yourself
Oh, I like that. Just be.
and see what happens.
And it's interesting. And I'm remembering something in one of the articles we were reading about how even those brief periods of silence, like you're saying, just 10 minutes, can reduce those stress hormones.
Absolutely. It's like giving your nervous system a break.
A mini vacation.
Yeah, a little reset. And you'd be surprised how rejuvenating that can be.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The sources also talk about these rituals of silence that you can incorporate into your day.
Rituals of silence.
Yeah, like little things. Maybe you have your morning coffee in silence.
Okay.
Or you take a walk without your headphones in.
Oh, that's a good one.
Just simple things like that.
So finding those pockets of quiet in the everyday.
Exactly. It's about being intentional.
It's not about becoming a hermit and going off to live in the woods,
No, not at all. Unless you want to.
unless that's your thing.
If that calls to you.
But there's other ways to do it.
Absolutely there are.
Now, what about something like silent meditation?
Yeah, so that's more the classic approach.
Right.
And it can sound kind of intimidating,
It does.
especially if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
But it really can be as simple as just sitting down, closing your eyes, and focusing on your breath for a few minutes.
That's it.
That's it. It's a practice, It takes time. Your mind's gonna wander. It's gonna want to race all over the place.
That's what happens to me.
Yeah, and that's totally normal.
It is.
Yeah, that's part of the process. You're actually becoming aware of those thoughts.
Okay.
And that's the first step to quieting them down.
So it's not about emptying your mind completely.
No, it's not about that blank slate.
It's about noticing those thoughts.
Exactly. And you'll find over time that the gaps between thoughts will naturally become longer.
Okay.
And that's where those insights can come in.
So it's a practice.
It's a practice, just like anything else.
Now, I'm starting to see how this all ties back into that self-discovery that we were talking about.
Yeah, it all connects.
But one thing I'm curious about is the sources also talked about silence and relationships.
Right.
That doesn't seem as obvious.
It's an interesting connection, yeah.
What's that all about?
Well, think about it. How often are we really listening to each other
Ooh.
versus just waiting for our turn to speak?
Okay, yeah. Guilty.
We all do it. It's human nature.
Yeah.
But the sources argue that true connection, it requires silence.
Not just quiet,
Not just the absence of noise
but the inner stillness.
that allows you to really hear what the other person is saying.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about all those times when I'm so focused on what I'm going to say next
Yeah.
that I'm not really paying attention to what the other person's saying.
You're already composing your response
Yeah,
before they've even finished speaking.
it's so true.
And the sources suggest that practicing silence, it can actually make us better listeners.
Okay, how so?
Well, one of the texts describes it as listening with your whole being, not just your ears.
Your whole being, okay.
So it's about being present, paying attention to their tone of voice, their body language, even the silences between words.
So it's almost like active listening, but on a deeper level.
Exactly.
And I imagine that could create a lot more empathy and understanding in relationships.
Absolutely. And it's not just about listening to others, it's also about being comfortable with silence in our interactions.
You mean those times when there's like a natural pause in the conversation?
Yeah, and we feel this urge to fill it.
It's awkward.
Yes, and we've been conditioned to see that silence as a negative thing, like something's wrong.
Right, like you have to keep talking.
But the Buddhist perspective, it flips that on its head.
Okay.
One of the texts actually describes silence as a sign of deep presence
Really?
and connection.
So instead of dreading those moments of quiet, we could see them as an opportunity
Yes, to just be with the other person.
without the need for all the chatter.
Exactly. And you might be surprised at how much richer your conversations become when you allow those silences to breathe.
That's interesting. Makes you think differently about those pauses.
Yeah, it's a shift in perspective.
That's interesting. Now, I'm also thinking about the whole creativity thing. The sources talked about how you get those aha moments when you step away from the problem and let your mind wander.
It's like your subconscious needs that space to work its magic.
Right.
It's not going to happen if you're constantly bombarding it with information.
Right.
It needs that quiet time to process, to make those connections.
So the source materials is saying that a lot of creative breakthroughs, they don't happen in the middle of the chaos.
They happen in the quiet moment.
Afterwards, yeah. When you've stepped away.
After you've given yourself that space to reflect.
That makes sense.
Mm.
I can definitely think of times where I've been struggling with something,
Yeah.
and then I go for a walk or I'm doing something completely unrelated, and the solution just pops into my head.
It's like magic.
It is kind of like magic.
Yeah. But there's a scientific explanation for it, too. When your brain isn't overloaded, it can actually start to make new connections between ideas that seemed totally unrelated before.
Okay, so it's not just about relaxation.
It's about actually enhancing your cognitive abilities.
It's about making those connections. Now, I also remember the sources mentioned something about silence and decision-making.
Yeah.
That one I'm really curious about. How does that work?
Well, when you're faced with a tough decision, it's so easy to get stuck in your head.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Overthinking it, weighing the pros and cons,
Should I, shouldn't?
the what ifs,
Yeah.
second guessing yourself.
Yeah, it's like my mind is just a battleground.
And the sources suggest that silence can actually help you cut through all of that mental noise
Okay,
and connect with your intuition.
so it's like quieting the storm.
Exactly. One of the texts describes it as quieting the storm of thoughts so that you can hear that still, small voice of your inner wisdom.
It's like all that chatter is drowning out our gut instincts.
It really is.
So how do we actually use silence to make better decisions? What does that look like?
The sources suggest a really simple practice. Find a quiet space, even for a few minutes. Close your eyes, focus on your breath, and just ask yourself, what do I truly need in this situation?
Okay.
And the answer might not come as a fully formed thought.
It might be a feeling,
A feeling, a knowing, an intuition.
an intuition.
Exactly. And the more you practice this, the more you'll start to trust that inner voice.
Like build that muscle.
Exactly. It's like any other muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it gets.
It's like we were saying before, it's about that inner wealth. It's not about having all the answers.
It's about trusting yourself.
It's about having that inner compass.
That's guiding you.
Yeah. Now, one thing that really jumped out at me in the source material was this idea that silence can connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, that's a pretty profound idea, isn't it?
It is. I'm not sure I've ever thought about silence in that way before.
It's a common thread in a lot of spiritual traditions, including Buddhism.
Okay. One of the texts described it like this. When your mind is constantly filled with your own thoughts and worries,
Yeah.
it's like you're looking at the world through a tiny keyhole.
Okay.
But silence, it expands that view. It allows you to glimpse the vastness and the interconnectedness of everything.
Oh, I love that. It's like you're stepping outside of your own limited perspective.
Exactly.
Seeing things from a much wider angle.
And that expanded awareness, you can experience a sense of awe, of peace, of belonging to something larger than yourself.
That reminds me of those times where I've felt really connected to nature.
Yes.
Like standing under a starry sky or listening to the ocean waves.
Yeah, there's often a profound silence in those moments.
Yeah, it's like everything just kind of falls away.
And the sources suggest that cultivating silence in our daily lives can help us access that sense of connection more often,
Even when we're not out in nature.
even when we're right here, in the midst of it all.
So it's not about escaping the world. It's about finding that sense of wonder and connectedness within it.
I like that. And I can see how that could bring a lot of meaning and purpose to life.
Because when you feel part of something larger than yourself, your own problems, they don't seem quite so big anymore.
It's like you're tapping into a source of strength that's always there,
A wellspring of wisdom.
but you can only access it in those moments of stillness.
Exactly. And the sources really emphasize that this is an ongoing journey.
It's not like you just arrive at silence and you're done.
It's a practice. It's about cultivating a relationship with silence that nourishes you
That helps you connect with your deepest self.
and with the world around you.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
It really has.
I feel like my whole understanding of silence has shifted.
It's not just about being quiet.
It's about self-discovery.
Connection, meaning, purpose.
Yeah, all of that.
It's pretty amazing how something so simple can be so profound.
It is. And the best part is, silence is always available to us.
It's always there waiting.
It's like a sanctuary that we can return to whenever we need to.
Recharge.
Reconnect.
Find inspiration.
To our listeners out there, I really encourage you to explore the power of silence for yourselves.
See what happens when you create that space for stillness in your day.
When you really listen to the people around you,
And when you open yourself up to the mystery and wonder of the present moment.
you might be surprised by what you discover.
And until next time, may you find peace, clarity, and inspiration in the stillness.